the Espinoza versus the Montana Department of Revenue case. We'll talk about why it's a big win, but first, maybe we should get a little background on just what the case is all about, because some of you might be like, okay, what's this case all about? Everything like, we heard the news update. We heard Aaron talk about it at the start of the show. So Jeff Laszloffy, first off, great to see you here in studio. Thanks for dropping
Thanks,
in.
Aaron. Oh, my. This is a huge day for students, parents, and the taxpayers of Montana. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal.
Well, and it's even bigger than just Christian schools and scholarships and tax credits. It's really about what we as Montanans want to do with our own money, and having the freedom to donate your own money to whatever organization you want to be able to donate your own money to.
Sure, and even bigger
no matter
than
what
that,
the faith is.
And even bigger than that, it gives kids the ability to go out into a broad array of educational options and find the option that fits them perfectly. That's what school choice is all about.
Yeah, and and my kids go to the public schools, but I've got friends who are like, hey, it was a better fit for my kid to go to this school versus that school. Good for you.
Yep.
That's
and now
fine.
They can do it.
It doesn't harm the public schools. If anything, I think we've seen examples where actually it helps the public schools. Like we're in Missoula, because there's a private school that offers foreign languages. Then the public school said, oh, well, maybe we should do that too.
Right.
So they offered more opportunities to the public school students as a result of something that started happening in one of the non-Christian private schools.
Sure.
I mean, it's quite remarkable. So give us a background on Espinoza v. Department of Revenue. The quick kind of, here's what the case is all about. Because if people go right now, if you go to MontanaTalks.com, you'll see this great photograph, beautiful family, single mom with her beautiful kids. They're the ones who started this case, really, in Kalispell, Montana.
Yeah, so basically this culminates an 11-year effort on our part. We wrote the first school choice bill, the first tax credit scholarship bill in Montana for the 2009 legislative session. And it wasn't until 2015 that bill finally passed. But when we sat down to craft that original bill, we already had a positive case on the same subject out of Arizona. So we called the attorney that argued that case at the U.S. Supreme Court and won. His name was Dick Comer with the Institute for Justice. We said, Dick, would you help us write the Montana law? We want to incorporate the U.S. Supreme Court language into this bill. And what we essentially did was, knowing that this case would be litigated if it finally became law, we actually wrote a memo to the court using the court's own language in bill form. So we sent their own language back to them. And like I said, it took till 2015. Finally, it passed. And Governor Bullock's Department of Revenue stepped in and said, okay, these scholarships can now go to every student, and you can use them at every school except a private religious school. Well, that's like 90% of the private schools in the state.
So they said, oh, yeah, you can use a scholarship, a tax credit. You can use that to donate to private schools. They just better not be that Catholic school down the street,
exactly,
or that Christian school down the street, or whatever faith it may be.
Which is exactly where this language that's in our Constitution, we call it a Blaine Amendment. It's also called a no-aid clause, but that's where that came from. It was Senator Blaine back in 1875 tried to get that language adopted at the federal level, and it was specifically to stop the proliferation of Catholic schools in the United States. So this has its basis in religious discrimination. Anyway, so 2015 it passed. It immediately got challenged in court. We won the two lower court decisions, and ironically, they used the Supreme Court language that we had inserted into this bill as their justification for upholding the scholarship program. Then it got to the Montana Supreme Court. They cited Montana's Blaine Amendment, which is in our Constitution, and they said, no, it's not allowed because of the Montana Constitution. And we have what's called a super Blaine that says not only can the state not give public dollars to a private religious school directly, they can't even give those dollars indirectly. And so in the case of our tax credit scholarship bill, these were dollars that never became public. A private person gave them to a private scholarship granting organization, received a tax credit, the scholarship granting organization gave them to the kids. They were never public dollars, which is what the Supreme Court said.
And that's why I even take issue with the FoxNews.com headline, Supreme Court strikes down state ban on taxpayer funding for religious schools. Well, maybe that's what the Supreme Court said, but the Montana case actually, it wasn't taxpayer funding for religious schools. It wasn't government funding. Maybe it was the taxpayers given a tax credit. They could keep their own money, and then they could use that money to support, a scholarship program.
Which is the reason that this case is so good for us, because the court could have ruled narrowly and said that in the Montana case, they couldn't give public dollars indirectly. But what they did was they broadened that thing, and they said the state, if they're going to fund private schools, cannot single out private religious schools to not be funded. And so they blew this thing wide open and made it available.
So in a roundabout way, the Bullock administration and the Bullock Revenue Department, in attempting to, and the liberal Supreme Court here in Montana, in attempting to block a small scholarship program being used by a single mom and her kids in Kalispell, in attempting to block that scholarship program from being the small amount of money going to Christian schools or other private, other faith-based schools, they actually not only lost that, but they lost on a much bigger level as a result.
And not just for Montana. But this decision's so big, it's going to nullify Blaine amendments in 37 state constitutions. That's how big this is. This is a landmark ruling.
Wow, very huge. Yeah. And it's bigger than just school choice. Because, I know, growing up in northeastern Montana, school choice isn't a topic that you hear about much. I mean, other than the kid who lives 60 miles out on the ranch that probably has to homeschool because just can't make the 120-mile trip every single day, round trip. But other than that, it's really more in our bigger urban areas where people have the opportunities, especially in the inner cities. It's a huge deal. But it seems like from what we've seen, our public schools aren't struggling because a single mom and her kids decided that maybe this school over here was a better fit for them. There's still a whole bunch of other people that say, no, I'm going to keep my kids in public school. It's working out great for me. So I just don't get what the big boogeyman is here.
So if you look at a state like Arizona, they have every conceivable type of school choice you could ever want in that state. And still 85% of the kids go to a traditional public school. Why? Because it's working for them. The 15% that move and go to a different school setting are the ones that are struggling in the public schools. And those are the ones that need specialized help, and they go someplace and they find it. That's the beauty of school choice.
Yeah. And by the way, if those kids are struggling in the school, then likely the teacher is struggling with that student. So you're actually doing the public school teacher a favor here too at the same time. But it's also bigger than that. I kind of kicked off the show by talking about the charitable endowment tax credit here in Montana. Now, you were a legislative leader back in the day, so you understand the Montana legislature. But we've been trimming down our tax code to make it, just to make it simplify it, make it easier. But one of the tax credits that has remained very popular that they've kept on the books is the charitable endowment tax credit, because it funds so many incredible organizations. Like take, for example, U.S. Attorney Kurt Alme used to work at a great organization, the Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch.
Yep.
They help at-risk kids.
Yep.
Well, they're funded through that. Well, because they're a faith-based organization, are you going to say, well, Montanans can't take advantage of a tax credit to donate to them?
Right.
Because if you follow their rhetoric in Espinoza, that's eventually where it leads.
And that was an argument that was made by the opponents in the lower court decisions, or in the lower court hearings that we had, that if you say that these tax credit scholarships that go to schools are unconstitutional because it's state dollars going to a religious organization, what about the Montana endowment tax credit? There's a bunch of these that are out there that would have been implicated, and so you can't pick and choose. Everybody has to be on an equal playing field, and that's exactly what this decision gets at.
Well, and speaking of picking and choosing, I'm already seeing it on the Montana Politics hashtag on Twitter, all the left-wing activists complaining about this decision.
Doesn't that make you feel good?
Well, that is kind of, pop the popcorn and kick back and enjoy it. But also, it's like they pretend so much to care about public employees. They haven't said a peep in support of our police officers. They haven't said a peep about these cuts to police departments being proposed in multiple cities across Montana right now. Oh, but you pretend to care about public employees and their unions. Sure you do. President Trump's Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, she was in Montana yesterday. She joined us right here for an exclusive interview on Montana Talks. And we are actually talking about this very case, the Espinoza versus the Montana Department of Revenue case. And she told me this. She says, we are very hopeful that the Supreme Court does render these Blaine amendments into the dustbin of history. She says it really has been the last acceptable form of bigotry. And of course, that's what the U.S. Supreme Court just announced earlier this morning as a big win, not just for school choice advocates and for religious liberties, but really for you, the taxpayers, and being able to choose where you can donate your money. Jeff Laszloffy was front and center on this case. We've caught up with him a number of times over the past a year plus on this very topic. Let's see, we were going to go to something after the break.
Well,
what was it again?
A little bit of inside baseball if you want.
Yeah.
So I mentioned that when we wrote this bill, we called the attorney that had argued the case successfully at the U.S. Supreme Court in a similar case out of Arizona. Fast forward, and all of a sudden it's time to litigate this case again, and we run up through the lower courts, we get through the Montana Supreme Court, suffer the loss, appeal to the United States Supreme Court, and I don't know if your listeners know, but the U.S. Supreme Court gets about 2,000 requests to hear cases a year, and they only accept about 50. So it's a big deal just to have a case in front of them.
Just to get accepted, yeah.
The attorney that helped us write the original bill came out of retirement, Dick Comer, and argued the case in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. He argued half of the time that was allotted to our side, and then the United States Solicitor General, the top attorney for the United States of America, argued the other side. So when you talk about Betsy DeVos saying how big a deal this was, I think that the broad array of people that have been watching this case is just astounding.
Yeah, well, and not only that, but that reminds me of where we were going to go after the break. Is Justice Alito actually cited your amicus brief, the Montana Family Foundation's amicus brief, in his concurrence. What did Justice Alito have to say?
That's a big deal. Yeah, and they were just talking about our arguments that we made in the case, and it was kind of a list of these guys, but we were mentioned in there, and just to be cited by a justice, and especially in this case because there were hundreds and hundreds of amicus briefs that came into this case, and so to get ours cited actually by the justice was it's just a little bit of icing on the cake.
Yeah. The other thing that was interesting, and if people go to MontanaTalks.com, we've even got an app available now as well, but they can see the full interview with Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos yesterday. But, COVID-19, every business, everybody's been impacted by coronavirus and COVID-19. So aid is going out to everybody, businesses. Heck, if you're a bar, you were finally able to get some COVID-19 relief. But yet the radical left is saying, no, we don't want private schools to benefit from COVID-19 relief. It's like you would deny relief to kids, but you're okay with it going to bars?
I think the good thing about this whole deal is the left is really exposing who they are. We're starting to see they want to tear down statues of Jesus in churches and things like that. I think they're overplaying their hand, and I think it's waking up a bunch of people that were on the sidelines, and I hope that people really get involved in the election cycle coming up, because this is what's at stake.
And it's right here in our backyard.
Literally, it's right here in Montana.
This is not just San Francisco and New York City.
No, it's not.
It's Minneapolis. It's Seattle. Heck, it's Helena. I mean, $300,000 cut they're looking at.
CHOP in Seattle is painting a clear and vivid picture of what America will look like if they win and we lose.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and look at Kalispell. What happened last weekend? The Ten Commandments being torn down with chains, and I'm seeing some of the liberals jumping on my Twitter feed defending it. Wow, they should have been torn down anyway. It's just crazy.
Right. There are two different viewpoints in this nation. We are a nation divided right now, and one side is going to win this debate, and I just hope that it's our side.
But Hillary Clinton said, Jeff, if you vote for us and if you put us back in power, well, then we'll allow the civility. But until then, we're not going to be civil.
Do you believe that?
Well, I believe that they will stop some of the attacks, but why should we reward them for attacking and dividing this country?
Right.
Why reward them for it? Because then they're going to think, what else will they think they can get?
Well, and you're nice. You think the attacks are going to end. I think they're going to escalate.
I think so, too. I think what Donald Trump has been put through in the last 4 years, if they win this November, they will put you, me, and the rest of the American people through those types of attacks for the next who knows how long. They're coming for your guns. They're coming for every other freedom that you're taking for granted right now.
Right.